The Northwest Law and Mental Health Conference brings together expert speakers with legal, clinical, and lived experience to discuss the impact of the law on people with mental illness and addiction. Our spring 2020 conference was postponed due to COVID-19, so presenters recorded their sessions, which are now embedded in the conference website along with their collateral information. Thanks to all our expert presenters, generous sponsors, exhibitors, volunteers, and the planning committee for the Northwest Law and Mental Health Conference. Stay well, and we hope to see you in 2021. Hi, Joe. Thanks for coming and speaking to us at the Northwest Law and Mental Health Conference. You were going to exhibit your books from Microcosm Publishing, but we got rained out. So I'd like to have you here today and tell us about what about Microcosm Publishing, about your books on mental illness and addiction and all kinds of other behaviors that humans have, and about why you selected this area to really be a considerable publisher.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me, and us to the degree that there is an us in this case. And I guess it's like I really feel like the best things come out of a person's own experience, and it's much like what I've seen with the peer movement in mental health. It's like I was really trying to channel and direct things towards people like myself when I founded Microcosm 24 years ago.
Wow.
And I grew up in Cleveland, through we had gone through bankruptcy in the city. We had gone through all kinds of bleak futures, speaking of the present as well. And so and I had been I had all kinds of the same problems. I had undiagnosed autism from when I was born until I was diagnosed not until 2009. So I was pretty old. But it's like a lot of the people that I meet in group and in that community are very much they'll say things not ironically like, I started using heroin because they said heroin would kill you, and then I found that to be just another lie, and you're like, oh, and then they could quit because they weren't, and it's just like a different kind of modality. And and it's really just, those are the sort of the people that I've always related to the most, is somebody that is just sort of categorically ignored by society, definitely categorically ignored by publishing. And so, I was really trying to create the kind of resources that I needed as a young person. And, 20 years ago, I tried doing things in the mental health space as well then. And, it was my generation that really wasn't okay with that. There wasn't the level of interest. It wasn't yet okay to, openly admit or even go to therapy or, sort of deal with your own addiction issues. You were supposed to just sort of hide them within yourself, or like point to people that were worse off than you. And, and I think that is just completely indicative of, the publishing industry as well, is that it's really, on one hand, it's people that are wealthy enough that they need a hobby so they have something to talk about at cocktail parties. But then on the other hand, it is people that have, either in their own lives or in their family or in their relationships, people that are, struggling to deal with serious things, but they just don't have space or opportunity or even vocabulary to talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
So I really thought of Microcosm as, making space to have those conversations for people that were just, ignored, steamrolled, treated as disposable, because that's how I felt. I ran away when I was a kid, and I feel like that, if not for that, I would probably have never sort of like learned the hard fought tools to be an adult in the world and learn how to like take care of myself and all that.
Mhm.
And, the interesting thing of all of it is that the majority of our customers have always been, women of color with low levels of employment
Really?
who have a hard luck story of, one stripe or another. And so it was actually when we did mental health and the law some years ago, we had somebody came up to us and asked us to do peer apocalypse. And
Yeah.
then we did that, and it was amazing because people just kept coming up and they're like, oh, you are peer publishers. I get it,
Right.
and we had never used that language or heard that language before, but that was and we were 20 some years old at that point, but still that was the first time where somebody put words to it that made sense, and so, and now that's really how I think about it every day, because I've just never, we do a lot of conferences and it's just not, for me, it's not people I relate with. It's not people that had lives like mine, it's just not for me. And so, I don't know, I guess I think of it now, the big change was that maybe about 5 years ago, the younger generations were okay, and more than okay, they were comfortable and encouraging of dealing with mental health, admitting there were growth areas for themselves. And so we re-engaged there about that time, and the stuff was just a lot more popular.
Mhm.
People were not, because a typical experience, for a Gen X person is they come, they pick up something, and then they talk about how good it is that we have it there, and how some people really need that, and how that might be helpful for those people, but they wouldn't want to read it or purchase it because then somebody else wouldn't get to have it.
Oh, that's a good line.
And I'm like, wow, this, it's like there's so many things that I hear in that statement, that I'm like, okay, I get it. Like you're obviously interested in this. You're obviously attracted to it,
Mhm.
because there's plenty of books you did not pick up,
Mhm.
but that's sort of how, people engage. And, whereas now, you know, Faith and I joke all the time that like fan mail is just people telling you about their own problems, and so, but it's thinly veiled, and but now, even when we're doing an event, people will come up and they'll see a book and it'll remind them of a story in their life, and they'll start talking and they'll be comfortable with that, and it won't even be themed around mental health or anything, anything of the like. They just know that that is a comfortable place where somebody understands that they can talk about it. And so, and I grew up in punk rock, and that's probably like the only reason I'm alive at all, is because like I met people that I related with who like were able to show me what, empathy looks like, and what like a system of morality looks like. And, there's things that you do and you don't do, things like that. And and now I think of it as really the one thing that changed for us over all these years is that, we're now sort of bringing that value system to people that grew up without that culture. We're, even if we're not bringing them the music, we're like really bringing them the value system of that.
That is an interesting idea about post-punk, is that it just did not have that same principled ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, and I get it. And I don't know, it's like, I feel like the most obnoxious thing a person can do is like try to tell young people like that they're doing it wrong, or like how we did it better or whatever. So
Mm.
it's way more rewarding for me to go outside of that
Mhm.
community and engage with people that did not have that, but are still very attracted to the ideas if they're packaged in a way that it makes sense to them.
Mhm.
And so that's really what we've, embarked upon in recent years, because, and I feel like that was the major shift maybe 10 years ago, where we really started to develop books in a way that you don't have to be part of inside the microcosmic bubble to get it. You can grow up with any sort of life experiences and know whether or not you're interested in making your own cleaners or not, you know. Like, you don't need to have a shared set of experiences, just a shared set of values.
And so that is something you look for in authors, I imagine, that you have authors who are also have internal principles.
Yeah, and you really want somebody that wants to change culture, because they tend to sell more, they tend to have that kind of success, and they tend to know their subject matter well enough to know what they would want to be different.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas most of the time when somebody pitches a book to me, it just doesn't have any resonance, because they aren't coming at it that way. They either think that like a book is a meal ticket, or they think of it as like they have had a creative idea that they've held since they were a small child, and that idea is just as relevant as it was then. Whereas, if it's somebody that grew up and, had a set of experiences, like, for example, like if they lived in like the psychiatric system and they saw all the ways that was not working for people, or they saw like all the failures of the prison industrial complex, then they have a much more valid set of opinions, in my opinion, than people that are experts.
That's bringing that lived experience.
Yeah. And so, and I guess that's why they took to calling us peer publishers, is because, we get it a lot where, if you look at most books on the mental health shelf, if you go to a Barnes and Noble, the vast majority are books by somebody who, they're technical books by an expert who has no lived experience in the subject matter. They probably have a number of degrees. They probably have quite a bit of, they've read all the existing literature. They probably have a lot of opinions, but it's really night and day compared to somebody that has lived within that system and can tell you exactly what is wrong with it, and hasn't just accepted that is the way that things are, because I feel like that is the other major issue we run into time and time again is, if you've lived within a system too long, you either accept the failures of that system, or you just don't see them anymore,
So you're looking for people who have somehow maintained their skepticism.
Right. Well, I think of it as like they're an expert in their subject matter because they have suffered under it, and there's, and I guess that's similar, not everybody, but because a lot of people are just self-taught and they're very passionate about something and they will learn quickly. But I'd say by and large, it's, it's people that grew up, for example, we have a book coming out next year that is it's called Mixed Race Magic. And it's about the author's mixed heritage racially, and how all the other books in print are either stealing from his culture or they are not even acknowledging his culture. So this, it's something that just isn't on the shelf at all, and I think that's really interesting too, because, if you read long enough, you notice what's not there,
Tell me, just so we know, because we're not publishing experts, tell me about the timeline from that day that someone sends you that initial letter to the day you start mailing out boxes.
Right.
How does that go? Give me just a quick overview of the flow of publishing.
It depends. Typically it's about 2 years. It can be as much as 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, in some cases it's 5 years if we're just getting a proposal, rather than, meaning they haven't started writing it yet, because then they find out how long it takes to actually, because, I mean, like when you make any sort of media artifacts, you really have to it's honestly, if you're doing it right, it's a year of research, you know, and then it's another year of putting that research into a coherent order that isn't just resuscitating what the last person said,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And even if you're writing like a historical novel, you still have to know your history, and you still have to know what happened, and you know, you have to be read enough to recognize what is commentary and what will ring false to people that really care about something, you know.
So Joe, tell me more about this author who's written a book on Friends.
Sure. So she has a private practice in it's in the suburbs of Seattle, and you know, she's had this practice for upwards of 20 years. And she tells the story in the book where, you know, she's had a number of clients that have not had any friends as adults, and they don't know how to make friends, and they're trying to figure this out. And, you know, and then when we did the research, you know, there was no other books like this in print. And so, you know, it made sense that there was an apparent need. And, you know, we saw that this, you know, book would translate immediately to our audience. You know, it would do well in bookstores, it would do well, you know, at the peer conventions, it would do well sort of across the board, because, you know, I feel like anybody, you know, I think it's easier in your 20s and it gets harder in your 30s, but then, you know, when you're in your 40s and beyond, it's just, where do you organically meet people that are your equals, that you can relate with, that, you know, where it's mutual, you know. And I feel like that's just not something that is available in society. But, you know, all the research is basically that if you live in a suburb, or even worse, an exurb, or worse yet, on a major busy road, your likelihood is, the statistical average is that you will have fewer than one close friend, which there's only one number fewer than one, and it is not a helpful or promising number. So, you know, that was a no-brainer for us.
Yeah.
You know, we felt like that was something that would help a lot of people, and, you know, people would relate with it.
So, but you could see why someone would be cautious about buying this book. I don't have any friends. Who wants to say that?
Well, you know, and that's the interesting thing. So, I mean, and I think that's the difference with millennials and Gen Z, is that there's just none of that baggage. You know, they're just like, they don't have the qualms that the previous generations did about admitting those kinds of issues within their lives.
And we thought we were so liberated.
Yeah, right. I know, right? And it is the thing of, and, you know, I run into this a lot where, you know, you get these lectures about how, you know, you're doing it wrong or whatever. But, you know, I mean, not as a publisher per se, but like as a generation,
as a human.
And it is, you know, and I feel like it's very helpful for me to be around young people with regularity, because it's neat to see how they have not fixed certain problems and how they have completely fixed other problems, you know. And I just feel like that, similarly, I just feel like you don't often have that opportunity as you get older. You know, normally your social circle is contained to people roughly your own age, give or take, you know, 10 years.
Fascinating. I'm now going to create a podcast for old men called "You're Doing It Wrong."
Right. I'm sure that one's out there already. But should we go through some more books and talk about that?
Yeah, tell me what you. Yeah. I'm hoping you bring up a couple, but let me see what you got.
Okay, we'll start. So I guess, yeah, it depends how far back we go. So this book, I think, you know, Sasha Altman DeBrawl. So we did this book, it was supposed to be I think it was 2013 this came out. And he's the co-founder of the world's largest, you know, peer support mental health network, the Icarus Project. And this is sort of his prescriptive stories about learning to live successfully and healthfully with bipolar, and all the various, you know, escapades he got involved in, and how this essentially led him to starting the first seed library in the United States, and, you know, various other things, you know, from being into punk rock in the 1980s to, you know, thinking that the government was spying on him and smashing satellites, you know, on a roof in Los Angeles, you know, 20 years after that. And, you know, and sort of finding the balance between where he can be successful, or, you know, where, you know, a person with his life experiences can be successful without, you know, having to just become like a medicated vegetable, you know, because I think that is sort of the parameters that, you know, people are felt to be put in, you know, is that they either have to be wild or, you know, just completely sedated, you know. And so that, and he, you know, and Sasha's working on a new book now about transformative mutual aid practices, which, you know, similarly, it's about like how to build a support network, how to have people, you know, and really just to have the systems in place for coping skills, no matter what your life circumstances are, you know, essentially to know who your people are, to know what you need from them, to know what works in a crisis, you know, no matter what that crisis is, you know, whether you have addiction issues or whether you have just, you know, sort of like coming and going mental health issues. And so we have quite a bit in the, that we've done with Dr. Faith. These are her two most popular. And then this one came out in 2016, and then this one came out, I think, in 2019, maybe. It was a good gulf there.
And this is a whole series of Unfuck Your Blank books.
Yep. Yeah. So she did boundaries. She did anger. She did adulting.
Oh, wow.
She did depression. She did anxiety. And, you know, I mean, similarly, it's like this, you know, this was the book that started it. And, you know, like I said, when we did things like this 20, even 10 years ago, the audience really just didn't relate with it because they felt like that was for, you know, no matter how bad their problems were, they felt like this was for people that had worse problems than they did, you know. Whereas today, whenever we try to book events for her at bookstores, it's amazing because the employee will say, oh, my therapist recommended that book to me, or you know, they have that, you know, in the waiting room at this place that I frequent, or, you know, it's entered the acceptable cultural fabric of their life in some way that doesn't have to do with stigma, you know. And I feel like that is just been such a transformative shift in the world that, you know, I think is just purely generational. So, and, you know, this, you know, I wrote this book, Good Trouble, that talks about how to have a successful life with autism, and based on all the mistakes I made and lessons I learned from them. And, you know, and it really is sort of this idea that, you know, and I feel like everybody is this way to some degree, but not to the same level of ridiculousness, is that, you know, whenever you make a mistake as an autistic person, you file that away and you try to find what the relevant component of that is. And then you make that into, you know, the lesson learned from that. However, you know, whenever the peer-reviewed journals or, you know, the people with the PhDs that study autism would review this book, they would say, oh, well, you know, this person has no credentials, so why would we take anything that they say seriously? Like, what could they possibly know that we don't already know better than they do? Which, you know, I just felt like was so absurd, because everybody that I worked with professionally, I found completely unhelpful to the point of useless, you know? It's like I had to learn all the things on my own because they had no frame for understanding the issues, which, you know, I feel like is what drives everything that I do, you know? And, you know, and over again, even if it's, you know, just things about gardening or whatever, you wouldn't want somebody that has a PhD in gardening. You would want somebody that has a garden, you know?
This has been the history of psychiatry and much of medicine of adamantly not listening to patients and people with practical experience. And literature is rife with examples of psychiatrists getting into trouble and getting patients into trouble by leading them astray in their own vanity interests. And you're putting these authors, including yourself, forward really addresses that in a straightforward. You're giving them the authenticity and framework to speak, and that's quite remarkable.
Okay, cool. So, and then we've done these series of workbooks as well. That those have been really well received. Also, I think in the same way, because similarly to mental health, there is a certain part of the population that just they would rather write in a book than read a book. And so we've taken all of the normally what would be exercises in therapy or what have you, and made them you can essentially get all of the benefits of thousands of dollars of therapy in a $10 to $20 book. And so, we have these now for just about as a companion to just about every regular book that we do, in the same way that it's, sometimes you need this to work through your own issues as you're reading the book. And sometimes you would just do this on your own if, that's the kind of person that you are.
Mm-hmm.
And, we get, similarly, people think of workbooks as something as like a technical book, meaning it's for a professional.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to move workbooks back to be something that, just anybody would do who is working to understand something about their own life.
That's personal. Okay. Very good.
So these two are, we originally, I don't even know how it happened. We, Faith kind of came in like a whirlwind in our office, and then she had more energy than anyone else we had met before. And then, so originally we had done these as zines,
Mm-hmm.
and they had been just so popular. And, and then we realized there was a lot more potential for the, we've sold, I think, 5 figures of this one.
Wow.
And the same of Depression too, actually. And so it was kind of fascinating because, like I said, nobody had interested in acknowledging that they had anxiety 10 years ago. So it was just bewildering to see, that they really, really wanted to read about it. So we increased the production values on this a little bit and, packaged it a little more as a gifty item. And, and it really just, we get such amazing fan mail for this series. And, again, it's that same thing where it's like simplifying something that is getting less stigmatized and offering real answers to dealing with it. It's just something that people didn't have access to before. It's just something that didn't exist quite in this way. And, I wasn't old enough to be around for, Whole Earth, or, I guess I was around for the end of Whole Earth, but I wasn't around for it in the 70s.
Yeah.
And, but people often point back to that as what they would consider our roots.
Mm-hmm.
But, for me, it was more punk rock and the fanzine movement and,
Maximum rock and roll.
Right. Yeah. The 80s and 90s were much more my influences. And, I didn't catch Whole Earth until it was almost over, but, but I do think that's within the lineage of what we're doing. Maybe it was just like a incidental influence. And so, we really, the bottom line is forever how to help people. And, and I guess in that way, even Maximum Rock and Roll was very helpful when I was a teenager, trying to relate with the world and trying to learn about things that were more to my tastes, even though, I've sort of lost distance from, just because it didn't evolve in the way that I needed it to as I got older. It was rather stagnant. And, so I'm trying to create the things that I felt like those things should have evolved into.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very much like what gets me out of bed every single day, is really thinking about things in that way, and how, what are the gaps, and, what are the subject matter that is either taboo or just not being addressed, And, when we have everything from, we have a young woman who is BPD, and so she's writing about that, which it's, most people that are borderline are so stigmatized that they don't want to talk about it. And, and then I thought about it, and I was like, I would say that she's probably the first person that I know that is borderline that has used those words to me.
Yeah.
And, it's been a bit of a back and forth to make that into something where it is a resource for other people.
Mm-hmm.
But then the more I think about it, I'm like, every single book about borderline is like how to get these people out of your life, how to survive these people. None of them like acknowledge that the reader might be borderline, which, so it's just something that is so clearly needed, because it's the same thing with autistic people, is we're just thought to not exist anymore when we become adults.
Right.
There's just no thought given to like what becomes of us, and so, I feel like that experience has been very prescriptive for, how I live my life, and then being able to understand where other people are coming from. Or even, a couple of years ago at Pure Apocalypse, there was a woman came up that, she said, like, my husband has seizures, and, we just don't have, there's nothing about that for adults.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing that like maybe has a sense of humor. There just really isn't anything about that kind of part of the brain for the average person to read, to understand themselves. And so, that's another one where it's just really easy for us to, connect that with somebody else that has lived that and wants to talk about it and has a good sense of humor about it,
Well, thanks, Joe. This is amazing work. I encourage everyone to take a look at the catalog at Microcosm Publishing. The website is below, and it's packed with fascinating threads of thought, all kinds of
yeah. And we should give you a coupon if people want to order things, like they were at the conference buying books, we can give them a coupon that you can put below too for that.